Hey guys, Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us on The Pursuit. I'm here with Pastor Rick. We're ready to kick off 2022 with our first Pursuit video.
Yeah.
Starting it off as we always do, Ice
Breaker. Let's get started. Okay, so we haven't seen each other for a while.
Yeah.
And most of the time, we talk about this sometimes in our group with just you and me, which is not really a group, but the point I make, it's a lot of people. But we thought we'd have this conversation where we ask each other, hey man, what have you been watching on YouTube? One of the things Harper and I will do, we'll be like, we find a funny video. We'll send it to each other. We want to see that. You guys sent me, I think it was you and another church member sent me the Christmas socks video from SNL. That was hilarious. But we thought we'd like to do this with our group is take some time right now to share a YouTube video or maybe a YouTube series of videos that you've gotten into. Maybe it's something funny, maybe it's something...
genre.
Yeah, a certain genre. Yeah. So thought we'd start that off. So what would be your video? What is something you've been watching recently?
Recently and consistently for years, my go-to are the fail videos.
Okay.
I don't know what that says about me as a person, but for some reason, seeing people just fail miserably and like all these terrible things happen to people, it just excites me.
Right. So to make sure to help out Harper so that you don't think he's a horrible human being, if you don't know what a fail video is, it's basically like the America's Funniest Videos,
right?
But without Bob Saget. So there's that.
No Bob Saget there.
Right. For me,
now you got what's his name from Fresh Prince.
Right. Yeah. For me, I found this over the break. It's this video where there's this guy who runs internet security for a major corporation, and his grandmother had been taken. Like scammed by people. So what he's done is use his skills to scam scammers. He will contact these people and then take over their computer and delete files.
Oh, wow.
And it's fun to watch him talk because he's talking, he's got his voice changing software where he sounds like an older lady. And they're like, man, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I don't know. And he's just deleting all their stuff. He's giving them viruses and they're freaking out. And see, I think your fail videos,
I would love that.
Nothing compared to me. I'm just watching scammers lose their livelihood, and I kind of find that funny.
Yeah. Let's take some time right now and watch those videos.
Well, in this week's sermon, Pastor Kivett's been preaching out of the Sermon on the Mount. He's been teaching through that, the idea of the greatest sermon ever preached.
His sermon? The greatest sermon?
Well, I think he's going back to Jesus' one. I would hope.
Gotcha.
That's how I picked it up. So in this one, Pastor Kivett talked about how Jesus saw Scripture, how he interpreted, how he viewed Scripture. And he gave 3 things specifically that Jesus saw in Scripture or how he saw Scripture. Right. And one of the things that Jesus saw in Scripture that Pastor Kivett mentioned to us is that it is infallible. It is completely inerrant. There is nothing wrong at all with it. And so what do we do with that as Christians? And that was kind of as I was listening to the sermon, Pastor Kivett understood, he was preaching really to the choir. I would dare say that 100% of our congregation is going to say that the Bible has authority over our lives. It's inerrant, it's infallible. The question then that gets put to us is, what does that mean to us? What does it mean for us, day to day, 21st century, that Scripture is infallible?
Yeah, as we read it, as we study it for ourselves, kind of privately on our own in our homes, and then as we read it and learn from it together corporately when we come together, that means that it has to carry a weight to it as well. And it's like they talk about, not hearers of the word only, but doers.
Right.
God's concerned about the heart, not the outward actions of following these rules and regulations, but is there a soft heart that is softened and not hardened to the gospel there. Right. And so what life change comes out of that as an overflow of what's done in the heart, not just as following some rules.
Yeah. So what we thought we'd like to do is have your group discuss, what does it mean for us as 21st century Christians? We do believe that Scripture is infallible, but what does that do to our everyday life? How does it affect us in every instance, like our jobs, our homes, our relationships, even in our church? How should the teaching that Scripture is infallible, how should it affect us? Take some time right now with your group to discuss this.
All right, one of the other points Pastor Kivett had about this passage of Scripture was that Jesus believed that Scripture points to Him. And this is a big thing because as we talk about, already, as we talked about, with it being infallible, also that knowing that as we look at Scripture, it's not trying to internalize it and make it all about us.
Yeah.
If we read Scripture and think it points to us, it skews our view of the context and what it's meaning. And so if Jesus believes all Scripture ultimately points to him, then when we read Scripture, that's what it should mean as well. And so then that kind of leads us, as we've talked before, as we study Scripture, to really have that one big question at least as we come to Scripture. What does this tell me about God?
Exactly. You see that with the Old Testament kind of pointing to the cross and the New Testament pointing back to the cross. It really is true that Scripture points to Christ. So we would like for you to take some time as a group right now to discuss, what does that mean? If all Scripture points to Jesus, what again does that mean for us in our everyday lives? As we understand Scripture, as we teach it to our children, as we teach it to grandchildren, or we interact with people, when we share truths from Scripture with people, what does it mean then that everything points back to Christ? So take some time right now with your group to discuss that topic. What does it mean that everything points back to Jesus?
One of the other points that Pastor Kivett had in his sermon was that Jesus believed that all the Scriptures are to be obeyed and taught. So as we look at that, we know we kind of talked about that a little bit with it being infallible. We can trust that it's true, and so then it should have a heavier weight. It should carry more meaning and weight in our lives to be able to follow that. But as we talk about this as a group, maybe we can take this as a time to be a little more vulnerable and just kind of share a little bit about, maybe what is God teaching you right now or calling you to obey, to take further steps of obedience and growth in as a disciple following Jesus. Again, as we talk about here as our purpose, finding and pursuing life in Jesus. What's one of those next steps of obedience that may be tough or difficult?
Yeah. So take some time right now with your group to discuss, what are parts of Scripture that you find specifically for your own personal life difficult to obey? Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of The Pursuit. As always, you can watch previous episodes of The Pursuit by clicking the link provided on your screen.
Yeah, you can also go back and watch past sermon videos or even series that you may have missed or want to go back and rewatch. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.